let's kind of get into, and this is, feel free, Tyler, to think of me putting the ball on the tee for you and handing you a very large bat with this question. But if marriage doesn't solve the problem with lust, with pornography, or sexual brokenness, what's the alternative to getting healthy? What can we do if we get married? Maybe we're having frequent sex with our spouse and still it's not ridding us of this struggle.
Yeah, Trevor, thanks for the tee up. Marriage likely won't fully address those issues because we know that addiction is more of a neurological issue, it's a brain problem, if you will, that has been established over the course of a number of years, typically. So, what is needed to fully overcome those unhealthy, unwanted behaviors is an intentional effort, really, for recovery and healing and restoration, getting to that place that God designed for us. And that's identifying some of those core sources of the behavior. When did it begin? What were your life dynamic, relational dynamics like back then? Oftentimes we can trace this behavior back to family of origin. And so it does require an intentional effort to rid oneself of the behavior, the compulsive behavior.
I hope this episode speaks to anyone listening who's still single, because I think we need to hear, I shouldn't wait for marriage to deal with my stuff. I shouldn't hope it gets better and I don't bring that pain to the marriage. And I recall, when I was a young man, I was engaged, and I heard at a Bible study of men, a guy who'd been married a couple of years, and he had this exact talk of like, hey, marriage isn't going to solve your struggle. You need to work on it. And to a degree, like, I believed him. I was like, okay, I've heard enough guys say that I don't think marriage is like this magic pill that you just take and you never lust anymore. But I still thought marriage for me was going to be part of a recovery strategy, that because I'm married and I love the Lord and I'm sincere about walking in integrity, it's just going to kind of go, like, I'm going to grow up. I'm just going to grow up and it's going to go away. It's going to wear itself out like an old pair of running shoes, and I'll just get rid of it and not need it anymore. And I found that even that little bit, so I think the reason I'm saying this is that I didn't believe this myth wholeheartedly ever. But there was a little shade of it where I thought, yeah, but it's really going to help me be what I finally need to kick the habit. And I think for a lot of single men and women, that may be where they're at, of like, okay, I know it won't fix it, but it's sure going to help, right? Like, it's going to make it a whole lot easier. And I've led enough groups with married men and single men in the same group, and I can tell you, in every one of those groups, the married men are looking at the single men saying, I wish I were you. And the single men are looking at the married men saying, I wish I were you. That I could be married and working on this. And the married men are like, no, you don't. You don't want that pain. You don't want this level of hurt. You don't want to have to work through the betrayal your spouse feels and the words they're going to use when they tell you how you're making them feel. Like, don't hang on to this thinking that somehow it gets easier in marriage, because the stakes just get amplified and the pain of recovery is a lot more to work through. So I think we have to examine that myth all the way down to maybe the shades of it where we think, well, yeah, but it's going to help, because it may keep us from doing the work that we need to do. So for all you singles out there, like, go all in on your healing and recovery, because you'll be glad you did and it's worth it. And I think it just underscores, if you're married and you're struggling, rather than shaming yourself like I did, of I must be the most horrible person in the world, like, use it as that wake-up call to see, oh, it's really evident that getting married didn't fix my problems. I'm going to have to be more proactive. I'm going to have to do something outside of my norm to pursue healing. Otherwise, there's nothing that can just come into my life that's going to take it away magically for me. I'm going to have to do the work. I'm going to have to apply myself to a process. And then if you do, as we've seen over and over through the lives of men and women here at Pure Desire, change is possible, but not without hard work, intention, and sacrifice to really engage in your own recovery.
Another kind of shade I was thinking about, as you mentioned, was I think there's this expectation that when I get married, I'll have my spouse be my accountability partner. That, yeah, they'll help be a part of, my plan to get healthy. And part of that is they can help police me. And I don't know if everyone has heard this before, but the idea that your spouse would also become your, like, mother and, like, keeping up on you, making sure you're doing your responsibilities, is not a role that you want them in, and is absolutely not a role that they should be in, because you don't want your spouse to be a police officer and always checking in on you. And so I think that that's like another shade to, and I'll use it as a reinforcement to say that Pure Desire groups are for this exact reason. to be in a community of other people, following a recovery plan that's laid out for you. And I recently said it to someone just the other day that like a 7 Pillars of Freedom, Compassionate Warrior, an Unraveled group, all of these ones that we have for people struggling, they don't actually do the work for you. They just lay the path. You walk the path. You do the work, but you do it with other people that are not your spouse. And I think that that's such an important piece to addressing really what is motivating our behaviors, because you can take medication for physical pain that you have, and it can take the pain away. But if you don't know what's causing the pain in the first place, it may never go away. And that's why we have recovery groups. That's why it's such an important process.
Trevor, that's a great point. If I could speak just for a moment about the spouse policing and being the accountability person. She, I'll say, often is in that position of when is the next lapse or relapse going to occur? And she's often on edge. And it's just another form of trauma and anticipating that trauma. So I 100% agree that is not the right situation for accountability. It's just not the right person, the spouse. And one more thing around singles, those men who step up typically in their early 20s and say, I want to be free from this burden because I don't want to carry it into my marriage. Talk about respect. I mean, that speaks to their character. It speaks to vision for the future. And I would just encourage those men, jump in and give it 100%. You'll be in a much different place after you go through a healing and recovery process. And you'll be the future you will thank you for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, if I could also speak to that accountability piece, I think the reason a lot of spouses set up their other spouse as the accountability partner is they think, well, if they saw that I was relapsing, the pain of that would be so great that it'll keep me from ever doing it. And we think it's going to be like this magical insurance policy. And yet what we have found is there is no consequence great enough to keep you from your sin or addictive pattern. Because when we're in that place, our thinking brain is shut off. Our logical brain shuts down. And the lies that kick in and say, well, I'm not going to tell anyone, when no one's going to know, and I'm going to do what I want because I can't seem to avoid it. It doesn't matter. I mean, because I've admit, like, they set up, well, I'm going to lose my job or I'm going to do this. Like, that consequence isn't enough because A, you'll either find a way around it, or B, you'll still end up acting out and you'll have to face that horrible consequence. And so that's what I think happens in a lot of marriages. They invite the spouse in because they think, boy, that barrier, I'll just never break it. And then they do. If that's the only thing they're setting up, if they're not actively pursuing healing in group and doing the work and making the phone calls, and then it just gets a whole lot more messy because now the spouse knows how often it's taking place, and it just really amplifies the pain.